Guys, what is it like going up against inexperienced Russian conscripts? Well, Radio Free Liberty, Radio Europe has some breakdowns, interviews with Ukrainian tankers who describe what it's like going against these Russian conscripts. It's not what you expect. Let's get into it and we'll break it all down. So first off, I want to point out, look at this fucking guy. These guys are also rocking extremely Soviet era tanker helmets. These are honestly pretty thin. I really wonder if your tank was to really get walloped, would these protect you from your head bouncing off the bulkheads of the tank? I actually think the answer is probably no. But these do seem to have room for the intertank, like the tank intercoms, which is a nice touch. If you've ever been in a big diesel-powered vehicles, you know that the engine can very quickly get deafening. Even our MATVs, the diesel engine would be so powerful you would have to put on your active ear guards to be radioed in to talk to everyone else in the truck, as well as use the radio. So you can see this incredible Chad here. First off, yeah, he's got his press stuff, but man, he doesn't look very different from any Ukrainian fighting soldier. And of course, my guy's hitching a ride on the outside of the tank, which is just bananas to me. And as we've talked about with other things, there's a lot of these tank crews especially seem to skew a bit older. I think some of that is because, right, being a tanker is more about your knowledge than it is about speed or stamina or physical capability. So I think I think that Ukraine is tapping into guys who went through Soviet era tank training or were previously served in the independent Ukrainian military as a tanker. Those skills don't atrophy as much, and I'm sure it pays huge dividends now that they can bring those guys back into the fold.
В наступлении нам удалось встретить этот экипаж танкистов, который возвращается из гущи боя для того, чтобы перезарядиться. И они согласились нам рассказать, что сейчас там происходит на передовой, непосредственно на линии столкновения.
So you notice these guys are refitting in the woods. This is a good call. Obviously, they don't want to be observed by drones and other Russian aerial forces. They would be more than happy to try to take out a tank like this. So they probably go to a designated depot where they can refit, refuel, and rearm. You can see they're putting Sabo rounds back in. Oh, no, they said it was it was a trophy that they took from the Russians. There's their correct helmets, I guess. These look like NATO spec helmets, so I think that's what they are. I think they're old school Kevlar helmets. It makes sense to me that you would want to, when you're operating the tank, to have the earphones of the tank crew and then have helmets for when you're outside the tank or doing other operations. And look at how tight, just look at the space, how incredibly tight it is in these Soviet era tanks, man. This is like unforgiving. This is just, what would terrify me is honestly to have this bulkhead get damaged in some way, the joints or the locking mechanism, and all of a sudden you're trapped in this tiny, tiny steel tank.
Останній період був складний десь 2 тижні.
Okay, 50 shells a day is a wild amount of firepower. That means you're putting, if you're fighting during daylight hours, let's say you have, winter's coming, so we're going to say they have 10 hours of daylight. That is 5 shells an hour, a shell every, 6 minutes?
В день прикривали нашу піхоту, тому що там танки виїжджали і били по наших позиціях. Ми старались цього не допустити.
Їх там занадто багато.
So one of the things that's an interesting insight is that what we've heard is that the Russian strategy seems to be heavily based around artillery. Artillery will do the preparatory work of obliterating a target. Then the infantry will enter the fray, and if the infantry detects enemy still active on the battlefield, the infantry will withdraw and artillery will continue to pound the site. It's very different. So you hear from these tankers that they are covering their infantry. You have much greater command and control and coordination. You have tanks and infantry operating together, but that the infantry are seizing contested territory. This is really different from what we've seen from many of the Russian troops who won't really engage in ground battles over contested territory. Just a difference in strategy that I think has really paid dividends for the Ukrainians. But one of the reasons that they are able to do it and the Russians are not is that simply these guys have radios. The Russians don't appear to, not in the numbers enough. You would have to have a Ukrainian infantry squad or platoon talking directly to this tank crew providing that cover.
Є різні ситуації тоді, коли попередньо було відпрацьовано по ворогу, по місцям їхнього закріплення. І здавалося б, що там вже можна туди зайти після артобстрілу, після підготовки нашої. Вони інколи ловлять цей момент і завозять туди іще людей, дуже велику кількість, не те, щоб я сказав, погано підготовлених, навіть, здається, зі сторони.
This is also really interesting. He says they're not badly trained, but don't seem to realize where they're going. This is actually probably typical from what we've seen of Russian forces, that they often, do not seem to be fully informed about what they're doing. And it's possible that Russian commanders don't actually know until the last minute where these troops are going to get sent. And we've seen from some of the intercepted phone calls where it's very difficult for family members to trace where their loved ones are. And oftentimes, significant portions of intercepted phone calls, you hear family members saying, well, have you seen Vasily in Kremenina? Well, okay, that unit, or, oh, that unit may have withdrawn, or it was annihilated and rolled into this other battalion. It's very hard for these family members to track their loved ones, and that's probably a function of just sort of the breakdown of command and control by the Russian military.
Що вони не до кінця розуміють, куди вони попадають. Не надо. Я коли на ньому виїжджаю, значить приїжджаю.
Yeah. Also, everybody just looked ground down. But this dude is probably 40s. He's maybe 40, 45, I'd say.
Вони взагалі не бережуть людей. Там навіть не йде розмова про те, щоб зберегти людей. Там немає об'єктивної.
Yeah, this is another key difference we've seen, is that Russian forces are just willing to plug the holes in their lines with more warm bodies, with more soldiers. And that is a technique, but it costs them a lot in material, especially when Ukrainian forces have a material advantage. But quantity, as they say in the military, has a quality all its own, as he points out. But there's a return on investment, so to speak, right? Where your troops, if you take casualties at a lower rate, gain in experience. They coordinate better. They can see the battlefield better. In contrast, Russian troops who have a high attrition rate, they never get a chance to survive long enough to accrue valuable combat experience. And I think we're seeing this. We're seeing this in a tank crew like these guys.
Цілі так їх використовувати. Вони можуть закинути в голу посадку і там її тримати скільки можуть.
Yeah, he talks interestingly, which is that it sounds like they're brought into a bare force. They just stay there as long as they can. I think this is, again, the sort of chaotic environment of Russian command and control. It sounds like they are placed in an area. We've heard this story from other the intercepts that I've done breakdowns on, where troops are brought to a front line, Russian troops. They are instructed to dig in, and that is the last order they receive. And there's an expectation that they remain in that place, simply fighting for as long as possible. This is, of course, while militarily can be sort of effective, it's extremely demoralizing on subsequent troops. If they know that it's routine to throw troops into positions and expect them to remain there until they've been annihilated, eventually troops are going to have a problem with being treated that way.
Тільки можуть. Выскочили тогда на колонну, прямое столкновение. Я сразу развернул машину вправо и увидел, что техника начинает текать. Ну и в тот же момент наводчик открыл огонь без команды командира. И это было хорошо, что они еще начали быстрее текать.
Right, we've talked about this. Of course, well-trained units, they are going to respond. They're going to have responses other than run faster. Sometimes you will see them get down, return fire. This is actually really common when you have the enemy retreating or withdrawing. By continuing to pressure them like this, you can convert that withdrawal, which is an orderly maneuver into the retrograde, and you can turn it into a rout, which is a panicked loss of command and control, especially when you have inexperienced troops and weak command structures. When that happens, right, and you put a little pressure on an already brittle formation, you can turn it into a rout. And that can be good because instead of occupying designated defensive positions to the rear, oftentimes these troops simply scatter, and it can create huge holes in the line that can be exploited.
Мне, честно, мне понравилось, как они текают. Им тут нечего делать.
See there, I think that is actually a 24-hour ration. I'm not sure though. So anyway, just wanted to take a quick peek. I actually have a guess as to where these guys are. If they are in the Kharkiv region, I think there's two real places that I think they could be. One is, let's see if we can zoom it in here. It's actually on the north. You can see this is still contested zone, and it's very, very wooded. So it would make sense. And it's, you notice there's also a lot of mud, and that would be something you would see along the Oskil River, as when it rains, water is going to flow into those lowlands into the river. So, and this is an area where we've seen considerable fighting over the past week, because you could see there's literally no man's land. Things are unsustainably overlapping, right? Both sides actually claim that they hold this territory. So it's the fighting there, it's begging for a resolution. And I suspect that this area is probably very contested because, unlike some of these other regions, this is a very, very viable town and roadway. Obviously, like they said, the preceding 2 weeks have indeed been busy. You can see the large amounts of liberated territory. And as the front line is stabilized, right, there's still been considerable fighting taking place. And it only is probably going to get worse as more and more Russians not just come into the front lines from mobilization, which rumor has it is not really ended. It's just kind of gone underground, but also from Russian troops in Kherson that have been withdrawn, and it takes far fewer troops to establish those defensive positions near Kherson across the river, and so the freed up manpower will probably be reassigned to Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Anyway, guys, that is all I had for you. Of course, thank you so much for joining me on this breakdown, and thanks as always to my Patreons. Let me pull it up here. There you go. There's my Lieutenant Tier patrons. Guys, on the Patreon, I cover all the combat video breakdowns. You know, the viral ones, the ones that YouTube definitely won't let me show you. I do all those breakdowns for you guys on the Patreon. So make sure you join. Thanks to my Lieutenant Tier patrons. You guys make this whole thing possible. I'll see you all in the next one.